Hello, creatives, community, kind folks. Sorry for the delay. Welcome. We're going to talk about GNS with an E for tabletop role playing games. It's kind of made its way around in my feed, and I thought I would add my 2 cents to the conversation about an old but I think relevant way to contextualize um, how we look at tabletop role playing games, and if the game we're playing and our own expectations align with what GNS stands for. Now, uh, this isn't a surprise. I'm not going to hold it. It's gamist or gamism or gaming, and then the N stands for narrativism, narration, and S is simulation. And there's also the idea of like a small e, maybe 3.5 of these categories, and E is like emulation. And we're just going to talk about it a little bit. Not going to take this isn't going to be an extra long thing. Actually, I have to be off just slightly before 7 a.m. So my time. So yeah, we'll get into it. Hey, good morning. Hey, yeah, you didn't miss anything. So anyway, intro, food, put your feet up, uh, um, bring a match, light up that mind fuel. Let's go. So, welcome back. Thank you very much here. Yeah, got the little nature in the background. Hopefully, it will encourage our. Um, we'll get into it there, Drew. We'll get into it. So, the in short, the idea behind GNS, and I'll explain the small e in just a moment, is that when we approach a tabletop role playing game, some of us have different ideas about what it means to play that game. And um, if we're it's basically this is one of these how the sausage is made kind of episodes where those of us that enjoy or don't enjoy a game, it might be because of our expectations of it and how we interact with the game. In short, gamism is about using the rules of the game and thinking of the game's world operating in the way that the mechanics run in the game. And mind you, I know this is extremism happens in the community. It's not that we all are one particular one. Um, yeah, it was, but I think it's expanded out from this point, and you'll follow me on this. Gamism is about mechanics and rules, and some people prefer a game that has rules for the majority of adjudication. Some people will default into the rules over, say, real world logic. Maybe a game. A perfect example is the classic falling rules for Dungeons and Dragons, and how people will look at the falling rules for Dungeons and Dragons and go, "Well, there's no way you can survive." But according to the rules in the game, you roll some dice, take some damage, and you get to walk away from it. And some bounce off of that and go, "This doesn't make sense," and others just shrug their shoulders and go, "Yeah, okay, that's just part of the game. Let's keep moving." Um, and in a gamist I methodology, it's like, well, just default to the rules. The rules say what can happen, and sometimes it can be because human beings design things, and they can't design for every edge case or design a mechanism that simulates. We'll get into simulation. Simulates the real world, then uh, it can make some of us. It can have a what is it, uncanny valley effect on some players where there's like, or even game masters that are like, this rule applied realistically doesn't make sense. So let's go from the G, and G is basically using the game and the game mechanics. And sometimes there can be a glitch in the reality of the world because the game mechanic has a difficulty um, um, simulating what the real world will be. And some people just don't like that. It was like, look, the game is the game. That's the rule. Let's go with it. Now, N is honestly should be at the end of this discussion, but N stands for narration or narrativism. And it's not about the real world, it's not about simulation, it's about telling an emergent story. And some people think that narrativism is about ignoring rules, but instead it's more about having a game system that is designed to tell a story and have an emergent story. And in many ways, these are mechanics where characters' feelings have an effect on how good or bad they do. It embraces failure as a reward system so that sometimes let's say your character has an obsession or is distracted or has an addiction or something, that you gain benefits in the game when you perform badly. And there is a constant conflict whether your character will be good or won't be good. And in many ways, games designed around narrativism are ones where to be the best at the game, basically to dominate the game, you actually have to play. Um, you have to sub optimize. The game encourages you to sub optimize. Fate is a good example of a game that does this, where you have these like compels and aspects on your character sheet, and some of them may say something like, I'm trying to think of a good one off the top of my head. Uh, oh, you have a dedication to your family over the mission, and you may gain fate points. You've been spending fate points to be a badass, but now you've got a letter from your family, or your family is like in trouble, and you know the mission needs to be solved, and instead you go, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be compelled to act in favor of my family instead, and then you gain those fate points back. And these kind of games are the style where if you're playing something like classic Dungeons and Dragons, and you create a sub optimized character, the bumbling rogue or the weak fighter, and people look at you like you're crazy. Narrative games kind of embrace that. What is it? Thirsty Sword Lesbians is a good example of a game where instead of suffering physical harm when you get into fights, you suffer emotional baggage and traits, things like jealousy and anger and confusion and low self-esteem when you're in these fights. And it benefits your character if other people help you alleviate you of those emotional struggles and whatnot. And then there's simulationism. And simulationism is are games designed and players who desire games that simulate real life. And some say like the OSR kind of fits into this, where there's a randomization takes precedent over meta currencies, so that like the world is unfeeling in many simulationist games. And the bigger better weapon is always better than the smaller one. The As many of the rules, like for example, like falling off of cliffs and drowning and such, have more, shall I say, realistic light consequences. And uh, it very much deviates from the gameness and the narrativist, because in a simulationist type of game, there aren't very many. Uh, they prefer not to have many traits where it says something like, be, be, some games have a meta currency or ability that lets you do something that in a story makes sense, but in real life doesn't. So, for example, um, you may have something that has like, hey, when I use a point, I can gain a success, or if I use a point, I can rally the troops together and fight back one last time or go out in a blaze of glory. And simulationists are like, no, that doesn't really happen in real life. Roll the dice, and if it doesn't happen, oh well. If it does happen, okay, cool. Oh yeah, hey Spooky, your Parlor Room on Dropout TV just did a short live play of Thirsty Sword Lesbians for those who have wanted to see the system in play. It's actually a very good system. I know people get triggered off of the name of the game, um, but in short, it takes what normally in a role playing game would be a physical damage, like I'm bleeding or I'm unconscious or I'm paralyzed or I've got broken bones or whatever, and it translates that into emotional damage. Yeah, yes, emotional damage. Anyway, and the game encourages you to engage in those things, and people can bounce off of that. That's why I think talking about GNS in terms like Drew mentioned, going back to Drew's comment here. Um, oops, excuse me. That it wasn't about playing, but about design. But I think in common parlance, there are players who fall into percentages of these categories, and that's why some players, without knowing it, bounce off of some games and go, "I hate that game." And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I've listened to some reviews of Daggerheart, and Daggerheart is causing people to bounce off of it, and I believe this has something to do with it. Now I'm going to get to the small e. All right, hold on. Drew says simulationism is not necessarily about real life; it's about any setting. Thus, if you play Star Wars, the simulationism would be to adhere to that setting. Not okay. Here's where the small e comes in. So some some players want a game to simulate uh, real life, and some games try to do that, and then there are other games that are emulators. So it's like it's like simulationism and then small e. And small e is what Drew just mentioned, that it has an engine that simulates the reality of that setting and world. So Star Wars different than a cartoon, different than um, um, uh, improv comedy, different than horror, different than romance, et cetera, et cetera. So an example would be that in Call of Cthulhu and many of its uh, derivations for in horror style games, that the rules of the horror world operate and encourage all the stereotypical rules in horror, even though we know we can like look at a television or movie and go, people wouldn't do that or shouldn't do that or whatever. Those A simulationist game ensures that those things happen. So an example in a Call of Cthulhu is uh, most people who are fans of that game, and there are hardcore fans of every iteration of or any iteration of the Call of Cthulhu style of horror, know that you're not going to win. You're not going to win against Cthulhu. You're not going to stop the Lovecraftian horrors. I mean, you're not going to win against them ultimately. You'll just have um, you'll win small battles, but you won't win the war. And it's more or less a game of like I don't need to be the fastest. I just need to be faster than you. Now there are some players that can't play that game because they think, well, all I'm going to do is strap up with as many guns and armor and explosives, and then I'll just win. And that's not the game. And so some people bounce off of the idea of playing a game where the rules, like for example in Star Wars, there's like the light, there's the light side and the dark side, and there are games that emulate like, oh well, if the force is with me, I can do impossible things, and if I use the dark side, eventually it's going to go against me, but it's easier to do. And that's a rule in the world of Star Wars that doesn't apply to reality. And so there are some players, I think classically, because the GNS is a little bit older, that the simulationist part tended to fall into Dungeons and Dragons, where the bigger, better weapon and the heavier armor always wins against the smaller weapon and the lighter armor. Whereas some other games, like if you are a gamist and you earn a trait that makes you a badass with a dagger, it doesn't matter whether the weapon is bigger and the armor is tougher. I've got this thing on my sheet that says, I don't know, hail of daggers. And it's like, well, there's no way you can carry 30 daggers, but you're going to hit 30 targets. And it's like, it doesn't matter. That's what the game says. I can throw a hail of daggers. I want to throw a hail of daggers. It doesn't matter where they came from or what happens. That's just what my ability. In a narrativist style game, I might be able to throw that hail of daggers if I gained points because of um, I allowed a complication to complicate a prior act. Like the game master came in and was like, "I'm going to intrude on you. Hey, would you like to take these extra points by me complicating your life?" And the player goes, "Sure." And then now I've got points to spend on Hail of Daggers, and it's more story related. I failed before, but I'm going to overcome my fear or guilt or insecurities, and now I'm going to throw these hail of daggers, right? And it's all story based, or maybe emotionally based, or um, cycles of history based. And then in the simulationist, it's like, well, you're you're not. It doesn't make sense that you're throwing 30 daggers. If you've got three, you could throw those three daggers. But for the most part, if someone's got heavy armor, we all know that daggers can't pierce heavy armor, and it might be. Now I'm being sarcastic when I'm describing this, but these are categories. And now, of course, like anything in tabletop role playing games, when you go extreme, it's a little ridiculous. But game designers can look at that and go, okay, my game is designed around a particular type of gameplay. And so therefore, it may be true, and you understand that players that are looking for something, uh, one of those 3.5 categories, are going to bounce off of it. So, um, and the reason I bring this up is because Daggerheart is making people think, or actually rethink, the way they look at games, and where they might scrunch their forehead and go like, "Why is it?" It's like Daggerheart just doesn't. I just don't like Daggerheart, and some of it may be because they're expecting, for example, like Dungeons and Dragons, where Daggerheart has a thick patina of Dungeons and Dragons on the surface, but it's very heavily into the narrativist style of game, and it very much is embracing the idea of uh, I'm going to get back into the sausage making, the idea of like big damn heroes and storytelling beats, and leaving pausing the game and leaving space so that we almost like you're watching a movie or reading a book, where you have highs and lows in the narrative action, and then if you were to almost almost by virtue of the way the game is designed, you could rewind and turn it into a story beat movie or television show, or reading passages in a book. And real life doesn't work that way, but narrative games tend to fall into a category where um, it pushes you to uh, it pushes you towards a type of storytelling element. And I think on the simulation emulation thing, which I heard, I don't know, you can make distinctions how you want, that some in the OSR, old school Renaissance, old school rules, or it stands, the OS and the R stand for many different things, but essentially they are games designed similar to, or are rules or rewritten rules or reorganized rules from old school play. And there was a bit of like a coldness to those games, where it's just like, hey, if you played bad, you died. That was it. It was like, if you weren't careful, oh well, that thing's going to happen to you. And there was a bit of like game master, dungeon master, um, uh, adversarialness in the game, where the game was unforgiving, and some people like that. They don't want the guardrails on. They don't want to know that I've got these 3 points in my back pocket that I can pull out called luck or grit or heroism that allows me to automatically succeed or get 3 extra dice to do this thing simply because I'm a big damn hero. It's no, my character is weak and I'll be weak, and there's no reason why my wizard would ever be able to, break out of the ropes for any good reason simply because they're courageous or something like that. Because the story says, the story says, hey, at the last minute I should be able to do this thing. It's like, no, either you have it or you don't. Spook says, bag of holding loaded with the maximum number of daggers the bag can hold. Uh-oh. Teleport or fly above target, tear or turn the bag inside out. Hail of daggers. There you go. Some might hit hilt first, but I'd go for it. There've been a lot of. Hey, listen, there have been plenty of like bag of holding, portable hole antics that have been done in Dungeons and Dragons over the years. That's just ridiculously hilarious. I've had a player fill a bag. I'm sorry, it was a portable hole filled with water. I've had bags of holding filled with oil so you could light it on fire. All kinds of things. Trying to suffocate creatures in a portable hole and trap them inside of it and stuff. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the whole like exploding rift in reality when you start putting one inside of the other one. There's whole you could do whole podcasts doing nothing but talking about bags of holding, and all the other ones like the Heward's handy haversack, and there's a pouch that does something similar to it. And then don't forget there was always a cursed version of those things back in AD&D. Cursed items are like they don't even exist anymore. They're literally legendary items now. But there was the bag of devouring that happened back in the day because of the rampant overuse and dare I say like misuse of bags of holding. It's pretty funny. Now, there's some slight controversy about the person who wrote the GNS theory in terms of game design about players not understanding or not having enough intellectual capacity to understand narrativist games. Maybe keeping our own, having opinions like that, maybe keep that to ourselves. But that doesn't mean that the GNS theory in terms of game design doesn't work. It could be a way for us to categorize like why do I like this game a lot and why do I dislike this game a lot, and if we understand how much gameism, narrationism, and simulationism we like in our games, then we can kind of say, I'm like a 30%er, or the game might say, wow, there's like 50% gameism, but I really like this game, stuff like that. So. The gold bug is one of my favorite cursed rewards, and there's a bunch of them. I mean, there was a whole category of cursed items that were, necklace of strangulation and rugs of smothering or something like that, all that kind of stuff. Hey, it's a carpet of flying. No, it isn't. Yeah, gold bug. Throw it in your backpack. It'll dig through your skin, into your spine, into your heart, kill you. Yeah, there were a lot of Gaxianisms back in the olden AD&D days that just would not work today. They were like they were meant to train players to be cautious, and also anti-factors that players that were too cautious, it would hurt them if they tried to be too cautious. So yeah, hey, if you were greedy, you got hurt. If you listened to too many doors, you got hurt. If you poked too many things with a 10-foot pole, you got hurt. If you ran to the treasure, you got hurt. Yeah, there's a bunch of that. Yep, goggles. Put your eye out. What does the gold bug do? I think the gold bug was like a scarab or something. I can't remember what it looked like, but it was like you would throw it in your backpack, and when you slept and rest, it would crawl into your body and kill you. Yeah, Drew says again, GNS was not about players, and thus the the brain damage thing Ron Edwards said about Vampire the Masquerade was about the design flaw there. Yeah, right, right, right. I mean, mind you, the tool that someone created doesn't mean that it can't be extrapolated upon. Yeah, originally it was about game design, but I believe it also represents player desire, and I think it equally both categorizations are equal. So it's like a key. It's a lock and key. As players, as people who want to play these games, I think we can get ourselves into a GNS theory, and then the game itself is one, and then how much do we align with each and fall into it? Yeah, because Vampire the Masquerade is a game that heavily implied a narrativist style of play, but people played Vampire like like a gamist exploit, right? A bucket of dice and stuff. Now that wasn't necessarily the fault of the game, and sometimes we fault games for things because players we fault the game despite the fact that the people are misrepresenting the game. So an example would be like a game that has oh, it ate coins. Okay, that's one. There's one that ate even from the back. No, I think that idea that it represents players is just bad and really should not be done. Okay, that's your opinion. It's cool. Um, I think anything that I think anything that allows us to very, I guess, more easily find out why it is. It's the sausage theory that I was talking about. I said I would come back to it about how sausage is made. Some of us that are in the gaming sphere, we understand like a reason why a game was designed a certain way, and we see certain mechanisms, and we go, oh, I see why they put that in there, right? And um, but some people are just, they're beer and pretzels players. They don't care why the game was made or what the rules behind it. They're just there to roll some dice and make a character and engage in a game. And they may not understand to themselves, rightly so, why it is that certain aspects of the game rub them the wrong way. And the game designer may have said, well, no, there's a reason why this rule is in here. By you ignoring that rule, it changes the game. An example would be just classic Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like there was a reason why treasure, not monster killing, gave you experience points. There were the fact that people ignored the encumbrance rules and looked at the book and said, well, there's experience written down under the monsters. Clearly, they want us to kill monsters. May not have been the thing, but that's how we engaged in it. And I think that's how like Vampire the Masquerade kind of had a bad rap because there were rules for humanity, rules for, falling to the beast, and a lot of navel gazing rules the emo navel gazing where they're looking at a skull and talking, lamenting their immortality and whatnot. And the fact that people ignored that is not the fault of the game. It's the player wants a certain thing out of it. They wanted a gamist um uh part, superheroism, I guess, dark superheroism. Like, cool, it's cool to be a vampire out of Vampire the Masquerade, when the game was designed to be like, no, you really kind of don't want to be a vampire. I mean, yes, you are a vampire, and in order to live out your eternal life, you're going to have to use some of those capabilities. But the game really wants you to not be one, and that tension pulls at it. It's why games like Legend of the Five Rings, about playing samurai, some people have a difficulty with it because it has game statistics that really emulate you being a samurai, where you can lose by, hey, well, I'm just going to draw my sword and kill that guy, which could happen very easily, but it wouldn't benefit you in the game because you're going to lose face and honor and glory and these other factors in the game, where it's not just what you do, but how you do the thing. And it some players have a hard time going like, well, yeah, but it makes sense that this person is calling me out, and I definitely have a lot of skill and ability to kill them, and I even have the right to kill them. Why can't I kill them? It's like, no, you can, but you'll probably lose the game if you do. Right? And it's things like that in role playing games that we can kind of look back at some of these categories. This is a type of categorization. It's not the only one or the one I think you can fall into, but a player can say, you know what, I prefer a game where the um the game doesn't have these meta currencies that allow instant success, right? Because some players might want to hoard those meta currency points to take out the bad guy at the end. And I've seen videos of people who are just like, well, I hate meta currencies because it just gives the players automatic successes. And it's like, well, it was done on purpose by the game designer to say, hey, in a if you were reading this in a book or watching this on television, our downtrodden bad luck character finally gets the opportunity to rise up. And this is how we represent it in the game, that they have their low point, low point, low point, boom, and then they rise back up again, and there's rising action in it. Or there's a rule. I'm making this up because I don't believe there is one. The mixed well, I'll use this. The mixed success and failure in games like the Fantasy Flight games and Daggerheart and Powered by the Apocalypse games and Forged in the Dark games, that it, the cognitive load on some people, it rubs them the wrong way. It's like, man, every time I roll the dice, I got to come up with some complicated result, and it's just too much for me to use. Yeah, I wish there was one. Some meta currencies. Some people are rich enough to. So I would dare say some people are some of your billionaires heading towards trillionaires are like, maybe they're living a meta currency life, right? Yeah, where they get to spend some tokens and things just work out for them, and most everybody else doesn't have any of that stuff. Yeah, it's just a constant downturn. No upside, just constant downturn. Yeah. Uh, but I think that I love mixed success games, and the cognitive load for me is minimal because it's not just me; it's everybody else at the table, and also you kind of don't need to be that complicated with it because we have a lot of examples of it because um much in literature and history and television and movies and anime and graphic novels. We have so many examples that I actually could just steal from everybody else and not really worry about it. And to the point where we we even have archetypical expectations of those upbeats and downturns, right? Like, there's only so much our favored hero can get beaten till we're looking for them to rise up and we raise our fists and that person dominates. We have a lot of stories in history where we celebrate the heroes of history because they've gotten browbeaten and taken such losses, and then all of a sudden they step up at the end. Now, everybody else that lived in the real world didn't get that success, and therefore they aren't very much, we don't honor those people. But the ones that where statistics and opportunity and just plain old chance allowed someone to rise above all, we celebrate that. And uh, and we it's much like I guess I'm going to flow into this slightly. It's much like the hero's journey and the heroine's labyrinth. It's like, yeah, it sounds like a structure and a formality, and why does every story have to be like that? Why aren't there other stories that are different? But the theory is, and it's being for the most part proven, that um crossing culture, crossing time periods and stuff, we have expectations that when we see a story or hear about someone's history, or we engage in a thing, that there are patterns in it, and seeing those patterns, and some people can see those patterns. I think GNS is a bit of a design pattern, and I see the GNS in player pattern. What do players expect to have happen? For example, there are people who are rubbing up against the sausage making in terms of dying in Daggerheart. Like, you know, Dungeons and Dragons has a very similar mechanism to Daggerheart about player character death. It's just that Dungeons and Dragons hides it behind mechanics that doesn't explain to the player directly. We created this so you don't die because we understand that the investment in making your character and in wanting to tell a narrativist story in a gamist and simulationist game is very difficult. So we're going to put guardrails up, and we're not going to tell you that they're guardrails. We're just going to let you do it. Daggerheart, on the other hand, says straight up, like, no, we, you're going to get to choose whether your character lives or dies, and we're going to take that threat off the table, right? Yes, you can go out in a blaze of glory, but you don't have to. You could roll the dice and do a 50-50 chance of living or dying, but if you live, you're going to pop back up like a badass. If you die, oh well. Or you could just, go out in a blaze of glory, or uh, essentially decide how you fail, decide how you give up, decide how your character gets captured or knocked out or trapped or exiled or whatever, right? You get to make that choice. But it says it up front, and that rubs some players the wrong way. And they may say, I don't want my game, I want to keep the illusion that this game is lethal, even though it isn't, rather than play a game like Tales from the Loop, where you play kids, and it basically is like, no, your kid's not going to die. This is a game about playing children, and you even have enough points between, I think it's age 12 to 18, and whatever age you pick, you get these extra like meta currency points up to age 18. So if you play a 15-year-old, you get these 3 extra points that you can have for like kind of like luck and grit as a child. And no, your kid can't die, right? The whole point is, yes, you were supposed to be riding on bikes and traveling around and investigating things, and children shouldn't be doing that because children have died doing those things, right? But you're playing a game where we want this to be like a story more than real life, and we don't want child death because, well, that's just basically a horrible thing to do when you're trying to play a game that is a distraction. It's a hobby. It is a game after all. Maybe we don't want to have those things, and adults have children, and you don't want to think about that as well. So how about we just take it off the table? But it doesn't mean there isn't. It doesn't mean the game doesn't represent characters dying. It just means that physicality doesn't exist. So as a child in say Tales from the Loop, maybe your parents move away, or you are grounded, or you go to juvie, or whatever, right? Like you become injured, you lose your memory, or something like that. Like you move across town, you never see them again. Same. That's basically a game equivalent of your character dying. Make a new one, right? Um, and sometimes it can rub players the wrong way to actually see that. And if you're designing a game, do you want people to know that you created this thing to elicit a certain behavior, or do you want to hide it behind the mechanics? Original Dungeons and Dragons had a lot of stuff in it, and they never explained why it was there. But in hindsight, after players removed it because they're like, well, this is useless, or I don't like it, or it's getting in the way of my fun, then you realize, oh, there's a good reason for that. Like, the problem solving in ye olden days of the OSR was there for it was why there wasn't a need to have a skill system. It was player competency. Hey, instead of rolling dice, why don't we become creative with that bucket and the rope and the salt and the the sand and the marbles and the feathers and the chickens we brought along, all those little things, the oil. And it's like, well, we carried all that stuff because we wanted to puzzle out the dungeon. Now it's difficult to be that creative sometimes, and maybe if we push the easy button and go, I make a perception check, maybe that's a little easier than I'm going to use my 10-foot pole and lift up the tapestry. I'm going to poke the chest in the corner. I'm going to roll a marble across the floor to see if it's is different. Is there what's the airflow like? Do I see scrapes on the floor for a secret door or concealed door or something? Um, yeah, the different types of gameplay, different expectations, but by by myself wanting a different experience from that game, and I say, hey, well, I don't like those rules. I'm going to change it. Then that experience changes, and it can have unintended consequences. Now, those consequences may be good for me, but terrible for everybody else. And I think that goes back to the Vampire the Masquerade, where it uses a D10 dice pool, and you can start dice pool hunting, where you're looking for every single mechanism that gives you more dice, D10s in your dice pool. And okay, if you want to play Master Vampire, anime, undead clashing in the dark or something like that, and it's more like my vampire is more powerful than your vampire, sure, you can play the game that way. But there were rules in the game that uh, wanted you to encourage a little bit more of the navel gazing. So on one hand, you were a badass. On the other hand, you're like, I wish I wasn't, you know. Um, and the I wish I wasn't was part of one group of people, and I'm ignoring all the humanity shit, and I'm just gonna feed and vampire my ass off with other people. Was another type of gamist style, and that's why Drew, I sure disagree with it not representing players, but I think players can, and maybe we could have a different kind of categorization style on the player side. But I think there's some players that fall into like, you know what, I'm like 70% narrativist and like maybe 10% gamist because I really don't care about the rules, but maybe I do like a bit more simulation of the type of game that we're playing. Blades in the Dark is really good for that. Blades in the Dark has very, very hard coded rules to really reinforce a heist style of game. Um, and you really have to take the forged in the dark rules and hard bend them to get them out of the heist style rules. And there's some people who've done a really good job in it, but it's very difficult to play. You really can't play Blades in the Dark like Dungeons and Dragons, right? That's not the simulation of this world. This world is the world of Blades in the Dark is about dark neo-Victorian heists, and that's what it is, right? That's just what it is. There's no getting around that or dodging around that. It's very difficult to bend outside of that thing if you try. So yeah. Anyway, just wanted to talk about that and get the ball rolling because Drew doesn't. And despite all these kind of things, Drew doesn't have to agree with me. It's not agreement or disagreement. I mean, it's not a me. I'm not a politician. I'm not glad handing and stroking egos to get you to agree with me. It's I have a mode of thinking, and some of it can be hard coded, but for the most part, no. I'm a student forever, and I think just having different tools for us to use to express ourselves, I think is awesome. So, guys, have a great one. I said I was not going to hold you. I really do have something else to do. And I'm going to let you guys go. There will not be a show Friday, Monday, or Tuesday. I will be out of town. Um, there will be a baby shower and other things like that. So, yep. And my alarm just went off. So, guys, have a great one. Thank you very much for being part of the show. I will talk with thee later. Peace and tranquility.